Hello.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, we're a little bit late. I couldn't find my login information. Get everyone on. Hi, Jorge.
I'm channeling my inner David with the beard.
You do. It's working. You're like the Nicaraguan Dave. What I always called you.
It's a nice thing anyone's ever said to me. Though it seems like my name is Christine Hoffman.
I know. Why is everyone's name Christine Hoffman? That's weird.
I think this is Christine Hoffman. It might be because I pre-registered you. So you might have had to type in a different. I registered it all from the same computer, so that might be one of the issues.
I've been called worse than Christine Hoffman.
Yeah, I've been called a lot worse things than Christine Hoffman in my 40-year career. Yeah.
I know. It looks like there's one poor person who's being called Stan Garnett, who's not Stan Garnett. That's
Really?
worse. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably libel, I think. Yeah. Electronic, that's a form of electronic defamation. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So, the panel's going to be starting in 4 minutes. So I think I'm just going to do a quick intro, and then I'm going to have all of you guys introduce yourselves and just, give a brief who you are, what you do, maybe where you went to law school. Again, for you guys just to remember who our audience is, these are going to be the fellows of law school. Yes, we can. So they are college students, generally diverse first-generation students. We're having this panel, which we appreciate you guys so much for doing. This panel is arising out of a survey that we did, and a lot of our fellows wanted to get a little bit more information on social justice initiatives and how you can use a legal degree to change the world, for lack of a better way to put it. I think you guys know, with the amount of social unrest that's been going on, I think it's really important to see how lawyers have been responding to some of these really important social movements. So yeah, and Lexi, if you want to wave, you actually, we can see who you are. So Lexi's going to be the moderator. And yeah, I mean, I think that's it. Does anyone have any questions before we wait for everyone?
Yeah. There's 3 of us who are showing up as Christine Hoffman. Like my name just changed, and Denise and Stan are going through the same thing, I think.
I know. So Christine said that it's because she pre-registered all of you guys.
Okay.
I was able to. Are you all able to change it with the little ellipses dots on the top right?
Yeah,
I just changed mine. So Stan and Denise may want to do the same thing. Okay.
I can change mine too. So what do? You go to
your name. It'll say, if you put like a little thing, that little hand up on the top right corner, it'll say mute, and then also 3 little dots like an ellipses.
Yeah.
Click on the ellipses. It should pop down, and it should say rename.
Oh.
Yeah, that doesn't show up on mine, but I'll keep fiddling around with it. Mine is maybe meeting settings. Let's see. Show name. How about touch up my appearance? I definitely need to do that. Meeting topic, meeting controls, maybe that's it. No.
I might.
Stan, it should be in the top right of your image. Like, I don't know if you see a blue square with 3 dots if you scroll over your face. Or maybe that's not the case if you're on that's if I'm on a laptop.
Yeah, I'm on an iPad.
Okay.
Let's see. I'll keep fiddling around. But in case anybody asks, I'm not Christine Hoffman, although there are days I wish I were.
How are you feeling, Stan?
I'm doing fine, other than I can't walk, but other than that, I'm doing fine. Yeah.
Great. I mean, it's 2020. What?
That's right. So there is somebody signed on who's not me, because they have both mute and video out. But regardless, we'll get this
Wait,
figured
Stan, I
out.
can rename you. I'm going to rename you.
Okay.
Now, because you're technically my boss, Stan, I gave you your real name.
Well, I really appreciate that. But for the
Yeah.
record, Erica, I think you're my boss, actually.
That's for those of you that joined and want to get on video for a little bit, it would be, I think, great to see people's faces. At least if you're, you know, clothed and your hair is brushed. All right, so I'll give us a couple more minutes, and then we can start, because I think we're going to have a lot to cover.
Great.
Wow, I see Patty Powell is on. Patty, you want to jump in as a speaker too? You've done so many trainings, at great stuff at Brownstein. You really,
No, thank you. Good to see you. Good to see everybody.
yeah. All right, you know what? Let's start. It looks like we have some people joining, and again, oh, I see Rami. Hi. Sorry. Okay. So, you know, if you guys are comfortable putting your video on, I think the panelists would probably appreciate that. But again, no pressure. You certainly don't have to. So, you know, this is, well, I guess first let me introduce myself. So I am Erica Gartenberg. I'm the Director of Legal Recruiting at Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber, Schrek, which is a law firm, a national law firm, which is based in Denver. I'm also a board member of Law School Yes We Can. So we're really, really excited to be able to bring you guys this panel. My understanding is that the fellows, you all received a survey earlier in the year about things that you would want to learn about. One of them was networking. So if you've already seen my face, it's because I did a networking panel for everyone. And the other one was social justice movements, correct? We are currently in an unprecedented time. And I think that lawyers are truly the linchpin, what is holding us all together right now. So, you know, what we thought is we would bring a group of lawyers, all of whom practice a little bit differently. We have some, most in the public sector, but we also have some voices in the private sector. And we just want to take some time to talk about what they're doing to address various issues that are going on right now. We're going to have Lexi Freeman, who's the Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and the Director of Externships and Social Justice Initiatives, and an Associate Professor at DU Sturm School of Law. She's going to be our moderator. She certainly has a much better knowledge of all of this than I do, so I think she'll be fabulous at that. I encourage you guys to ask questions. You can do that either in the chat function, and I'll monitor that and just pop in here and there. But I also think if you want to just unmute yourself and there's an appropriate time and you want to ask a question, go ahead. I'm sure Lexi will also stop and have some question time, and we'll save some at the end. So, you know, I really hope that you guys enjoy this and you participate and it's active. So I'll just call off the panelists quickly and you guys can introduce yourselves, and then we can go from there. So I will start with Stan.
Thanks so much, Erica. My name's Stan Garnett. I'm really thrilled to be here with so many folks that I've worked with through the years. I am a shareholder in litigation at Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber, Schrek. I've been a lawyer 39 years. During that time, I was a deputy district attorney in Denver for 4 years. Then I was the elected district attorney in Boulder for 9.5. During that time, I was the president of the Colorado District Attorneys Association and also a board member of the National DAs Association. And in my time at Brownstein, I've done all kinds of litigation, including criminal defense. And we've also done a lot of pro bono work. And I appreciate the chance to be here and happy to talk about any of these issues. I will mention that if you see a pillow behind me, that's because I'm in bed, because I'm on my second leg surgery since June, and I'm not allowed to walk. So fortunately, we're working remotely, and I'm able to do everything from these wrinkled sheets, and I'm happy to be here.
Great. Next, let's move to my dear friend, Jorge.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Jorge Castillo, and I currently work at the Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division. They have a special litigation section, which does mostly pattern or practice cases involving law enforcement, correctional institutions, juvenile justice institutions, and then also some disability work, mostly vis-a-vis people who are at risk of or are being institutionalized. Before that, I was also with the DOJ in their voting rights section, which does Voting Rights Act of 1965, voter registration issues, absentee ballots, and overseas voters like military voters. And then before that, I was with a nonprofit for 3.5 years, MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, which is a lot of words. So MALDEF, where I was doing mostly doing immigrant rights work, which is different than immigration work. I sort of classify immigration as things related to people's status or access to the country, and immigrant rights work, as MALDEF was working on it, was essentially asking the question, who is entitled to care about your immigration status and to what degree? Otherwise, it would be an equal protection violation or maybe a supremacy clause violation. And then before MALDEF, I was at a law firm where I met Erica, once Solier, now Gartenberg, and her wonderful husband, and probably the greatest legacy of my time there. That and many, many, many billable hours of doc review. But yeah, and I'm super pumped to be here, and I hope I will say now that I hope you all consider reaching out after this if you have any questions, any follow-up, if you want to talk about career or life or about anything Tampa Bay, which is where I'm from originally. I'd be happy to talk about any of those things.
And Jorge, do you want to just kind of explain your limitations as
Yes.
the DOJ?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So although I work for the Department of Justice, that is just a biographical fact. So I am speaking on behalf of myself, and nothing I say is an official statement or a reflection of the department. So hopefully you all understand that. I might remind you ourselves or myself every now and again when I say this. Thanks for the reminder, Erica.
No problem. I see Arya smiling. Joe Salazar.
Hello, everybody. If I would have known that we could have used a knee replacement or what have you to have a pillow behind me laying in bed, I'd be doing the same thing as my buddy Stan Garnett. I'm a former state representative, Joe Salazar. I graduated from the University of Denver College of Law back in 2003 when Patty Powell was there. Patty can certainly testify to the fact that I was a very feisty law student. And that just has continued throughout the years as I'm getting older. I started my own practice right out of law school doing civil rights work, and I kept that practice. Well, I still have my practice on the side, but I do a lot of civil rights work. I sue law enforcement primarily, and also school districts and the federal government. So right now I have a case that goes to trial in just a couple of weeks against the Department of Veterans Affairs. And it's been great. Through that experience, I then went on to become a state representative where I served on the House Judiciary Committee and ended up becoming the vice chair of House Judiciary. from 2016 to 2018. And then I decided to leave my seat and run for Colorado Attorney General. And in a very, very tight race with the current Attorney General, my buddy Phil Weiser. It was such a fun campaign with Phil. I mean, we're really super good friends. And now I am the executive director of Colorado Rising, which is a environmental protection nonprofit organization. We basically sue the oil and gas industry, as my buddy Stan would know, because he's opposing counsel on one of the cases that we have. And like I said, I still have my law firm. I'm currently going up against the city and county of Denver, the VA, as well as the University of Colorado. I try to keep my private practice, extremely limited to, very interesting cases. So that's a little bit about me.
Thanks. Denise?
Sure. Thank you very much. Denise Maes, and I think I might be a little bit of an impersonator or a fraud, however you want to characterize it, because I'm actually not a lawyer in private practice, I don't practice law, I should say. In my current field, I am the public policy director for the ACLU Colorado, where I am the primary lead for all policies that advance civil rights and civil liberties. And I do that work at the state capitol primarily, but also do that work in city council chambers as well as county commissioners. I will say that I do have a law degree. I did go to law school, and I did private practice for a very long time in an area that has nothing to do with what I'm doing today. And I think I've landed in the right place. The last thing I'll say just real quick is that this year, the ACLU celebrates its 100th anniversary. And so for the last 100 years, we've been doing a lot for civil liberties. The ACLU started out as a premier law firm, and although we still do premier law firm work, we also take our fight for civil liberties not only to the courts, but like I said earlier, to local communities, city councils, county commissioners, and we also take our battle to the streets. And we have been a part of, over the 100 years, of course, but more recently involved in a lot of premier lawsuits, all of which have gone before the Supreme Court. We have sued the Trump administration, I think now close to 400 times. And we've won more than we've lost, I'll say. And for that, I am extremely proud, and I'm looking forward to this evening's conversation. Thank you so much.
So I think we all can agree Denise is definitely an imposter on this panel and should be removed immediately.
That means I can go to happy hour sooner.
Oh no, I would like to hear what you said, what you have to say personally. Our last panelist, Arash, and then Lexi, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. It is such an honor to be on this panel and with some of you participating as well. If anyone's the fraud, Denise, it's certainly me. My current title is Director of Policy and Civil Rights Litigation at the Meyer Law Office. I appreciate Jorge's distinction between doing immigration work and doing immigrants' rights work, because my firm primarily does immigration, but I am doing more of the immigrants' rights and other civil rights work. So after law school, I did a clerkship for a district judge here, Judge Daniel, who sadly passed away over a year ago, a huge loss to me and to the community. I actually was clerking when Judge Arguello, who's responsible for this amazing program, joined the federal bench. And then I did, again, sounds similar to what Jorge did for a few years, what we call big law at a firm in DC, doing things that I didn't enjoy so much for 3 years. But then I found my way to Denver and to civil rights, which I love. I was at a private firm called Rathod Mohammed Bai for 4.5 years. And then I had the pleasure of being at the ACLU of Colorado with Denise for 2.5 years. And here I am now. And I got to kind of carve out this role where I do that kind of civil rights private practice work, half of my job, similar to what Joe does in his work, suing law enforcement, suing other government actors, and then doing a fair amount of employment law, employment discrimination, and a bit of what we call wage theft, unpaid overtime and other wages by employers. So it's a good mix of things that I've been able to work out on my own. And then half of my work is a policy role where I focus on immigrant rights. And similar to what Denise said, a lot of that happens at the state capitol. Kind of the big thing we did this past session, my office, along with other organizations, including the ACLU, is passing a law in Colorado where ICE cannot arrest people at courthouses and attending court. Just to give you one small example. And then I also work with city councils and other public officials. So I think I've gone on long enough, and that's a good enough intro, but I'm just so delighted to be here with everyone.
I think that is my cue, if that's okay, Erica. Again, I'm Lexi Freeman, and I'm Associate Dean and Professor at the Law School. Basically, the long titles just means I get to do everything diversity, equity, and social justice at DU, which is a pretty awesome niche to be in. And I'm super excited to see some of my students, actually, who are currently at Denver Law, and then a couple of alums on the list. So that's awesome. I wish I had a program like this when I was a student of color navigating, thinking about law school, and then ultimately being in law school. So really glad that you all have each other, and really thankful for all the panelists who are really busy people in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of like everything going on, taking time. So thank you to all of you, because I know everything just feels very extra, I think, today, now, right? Everything is heavy and everything is more challenging. So we appreciate you prioritizing this. I should mention that I'm really excited about this panel because prior to joining Denver Law, I was a racial justice movement lawyer at a nonprofit in DC. So the idea of talking about social justice movements very much resonates with me personally and professionally. So I think I'm going to get started with maybe a really broad question. I feel like we have an hour about. To Erica's point, if folks do have questions or comments, feel free. I think that the most efficient ways would be either to put it in the chat or to raise that little blue hand if possible. I do see one hand raised now, and I want to make sure there's not a logistical problem. Maria, do you have any question? I want to make sure you can hear and all that. Okay, I'm going to lower the hand because I will then keep looking at that if that's thinking it's a question, but feel free to pop anything. I actually can't lower it, so whoever's the in charge of that can do that.
I'll assign you as a host as well, Lexi.
Okay, awesome. Anyway, raise the hand, please, or put something in the chat if you have a question, and either we can try to do some in the middle, and we'll certainly have some time at the end as well. So I think the first question that I'd love to just sort of pose to all of the panelists is, I mean, thinking about this moment that we're in, right? There's so much going on when it comes to social justice. I think when it comes to, pain people are experiencing, when it comes to injustices. And I would just love if you could sort of share what you think the most pressing issues are. And then if you could also talk a little bit about your specific work right now. Some of you did this a little bit, but maybe one tangible example with going a little bit deeper into one example as to sort of how you're addressing what you see as a really pressing moment in October of 2020, which is just a really challenging year. So I'll alternate who gets to go first. Maybe this time we'll go with Denise.
Okay. I think there are so many pressing social justice issues that we are all confronted with, and the majority of them, of course, are beyond our control. And I hate to call one out versus another because that might suggest that I view one as more important than the other, and that's not the case. So I'm actually going to call out three and then maybe spend a little time on one of them. But I think first and foremost I think voting rights is definitely something that all of us probably need to be paying particular attention to as a social justice issue, and access to the ballot and making certain that your vote is counted. And then I think we have this pandemic of COVID, and it's having a disproportionate impact on communities of color. And I think that we can all agree that the virus itself is not racist, but it certainly has uncovered a very long and systemic racist past. And there are a lot of things in that area that we have to deal with. I would say the other, which is sort of the segue, is how much we are confronting and need to deal with racial inequities, and we're dealing with those racial inequities and injustices in all fields. What the ACLU has been doing of late is trying to bring to the forefront that our system of mass incarceration has always disproportionately affected our brown, black, and indigenous brothers and sisters and neighbors and friends. And this is a time, if no other, where we should be thinking of depopulating our jails and prisons. At the end of the day, there's no way that any of those individuals can follow any of the CDC guidelines. There are 2, sometimes 3 individuals to a prison cell. They share the same toilet. They stand right by each other in line for food and for the showers. And they are in an environment with guards that sometimes use masks, sometimes don't. And those individuals that work in our jails and prisons go back out into community and come back in. And so there is the ability to spread that virus in a way that is really detrimental to a lot of folks. So we have been spending quite a bit of time on that particular issue of depopulation.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I'm just going to keep muting myself, so I might just have a little delay in getting back up. Stan, would you like to go next?
Sure, you bet. And I really appreciate the chance to talk about these issues. I agree with everything that Denise said. But I think that one of the real challenges that we have as a culture and as communities is to figure out how to talk about issues in a way that is focused on actual problem solving and actual solutions, while also maintaining the ability to have the rules and regulations necessary for large numbers of people to be able to live in cities and in large communities. And one of the things that I do worry about, and I've talked about this a lot, is that we as a country and as a culture, and I think this is unique, frankly, to the United States, we tend to approach almost every issue as an issue of whose rights are being violated. What is the violation of rights that's occurring? And we focus on that, in my experience, often to the exclusion of finding reasonable solutions. One of the reasons that I think we have so much difficulty with gun control in the United States is because the discussion starts and ends with the Second Amendment. And rather than saying, sitting around debating whether a particular proposal for gun control will infringe on somebody's Second Amendment rights, I think we should be sitting around and saying, how do we figure out a reasonable way to make sure that people can still maintain the right to protect their homes and their communities, but we can also get rid of the very dangerous weapons that we have in our community. So I think we have to find a way to talk about issues that is solution focused and that works along themes of community good and community obligation. And I think discussions like this can help with that. I think the legislature and other areas that hear about issues and how to approach them can help with that. But the bottom line is we have to be able to come out with a system of government, of law enforcement, of public safety that is fair, that protects our communities, that keeps people safe, but does it in a way that is not racist and not disproportionately punitive. I'll say in conclusion, and this is to kind of add on to a point that Denise made, we have a real cultural emphasis on over-incarceration in the United States. And I think we certainly see that with the racial disparity of who gets sent to prison and issues around that. But we also have it in simply how much time we think is necessary to punish somebody for a particular crime. If you look at how second-degree assault is treated in Germany or Finland or Brazil or any country other than the United States, and second-degree assault is a classic, very common crime that involves somebody either using a deadly weapon to injure somebody or causing serious bodily injury to someone. We in the United States, we almost always, our knee-jerk reaction is that person has to go to prison. They need to be there for 4 to 6 years. and that's what sentences end up being. Whereas almost every other government, every other culture has other ways of dealing with issues like that that are much more restorative and help the person return to the community. So those are my views.
Jorge.
So the question of what is the more pressing social justice issues, I'm just trying to put myself in the context of undergraduates who are considering law or considering advocacy, and I'm trying to reflect on it from my perspective. And I gotta say, it is a very heavy question, like to try to figure out. So I don't blame Denise saying like it would be hard for her to pick one, right? There are so many issues, and it's also can be overwhelming when you're trying to determine which are the most pressing issues. You just have this laundry list of ills that you can say, I want to help, but that list gets so long that it becomes hard to even know where to start. And then you delve into something and you see, even in that like sliver of social justice issues, there's a whole bunch of areas to start with and ways to advocating, and it can be paralyzing. So if I can sort of twist the question a little bit, and I think that the where I focus on social justice issues is I think about it in terms of like who are the people who have a power imbalance, and how can we empower them to be able to have the agency that other people take for granted. You know, that can be in any sort of context. It can be, for example, in the disability rights context. How do we empower people to? Oftentimes, there is a regimen of what they have to do, and people's individual choice is taken out of it. And sometimes people have to go out of their communities to receive services or be excluded, or there's language barriers, you know, but that is just one aspect that is incredibly pressing to those people who are in that system. So the thing that motivated me to go to law school was immigration and immigrant rights work. And I see that as an incredibly pressing issue, but I've seen it manifest in the context of discrimination, in police accountability, in voting rights, in just all these different contexts. So what I guess I hope for folks is to spend some time with that question themselves, but don't let it be so paralyzing, because you just have to start somewhere, and a career is long. And so you can start down one path and then reassess if this is feeding your soul, so that you can make sure that whatever it is that you're doing, you're moving towards that social justice goal that you've sort of set out for yourself, and you're always reevaluating it. I hope I didn't veer too far off the question here, but.
No, that's great. And I think it's actually important because to your point, things can get overwhelming, but it's also like you have to figure out what you're most passionate about, right? At this moment, at that time, right? And sort of trust that things intersect, right? And trust that others also will take on the torch in other ways, right? So I think that's a good reason to sort of build community with others in law school and practitioners, because everyone is in different spaces, right? So no, I think it's a very good point. Joe.
Yes, thank you. And I'm much the same as Denise and the other panelists, that it's really hard to pinpoint, right? But I'm going to pinpoint two, because both involve some type of existential crisis that we're facing. Number one is climate change, and number two is the peaceful transition of government. One involves, you know, our continued existence as a species, as well as the continued existence of other species. Because of what we've done to this earth. And the other one involves the continued existence of our republic. Those are two very serious issues for me. Now, you know, as I indicated, I've been a civil rights attorney ever since I got out of law school. Before that, I was a civil rights investigator with the state of Colorado. So, you know, I've lived this life, practiced this life, and I've been a community activist for pretty much all my life. So I've lived it, right? And One thing that I saw when I was at the legislature was this dire need for changes with respect to the climate crisis that we're dealing with. We've been seeing it coming for literally decades, right? And as human beings, that's naturally our tendency to watch the monster approach us and close our eyes as if it doesn't exist until the monster actually slaps us in the face. And then we act all shocked that, oh my God, there's a monster in front of me. And that's exactly how climate change has happened. That's exactly what's happened with, police brutality, with racism. I mean, people have been closing their eyes for literally generations, knowing that the monster is there and not recognizing it until it slaps us in the face. And I think that that's an awful lot of what the social unrest that we've seen since June has demonstrated, is that it exists, it's real, and we have to respond to it. And the reason why I consider environment to be a social justice movement is because it's intersectional. We talk about communities of color who are disparately adversely affected by environmental racism. A good example would be Bella Romero, the school up in Greeley, as well as the Swansea, Globeville, and Elyria neighborhoods in the most polluted zip code in the United States, which is just right here north of Denver. And we have communities, we have young Black and brown babies who are experiencing asthma at a higher rate. We have immigrant families coming from other countries because those countries are facing some type of drought, or they're suffering floods, or they're suffering some kind of other climate change disaster, and they're coming up this way. And it is such a crisis that even our own Department of Defense, our own military, has said that this is a national security issue unlike any other that we've experienced. And so that's what makes it a social justice issue. When people start moving around, and what we've seen throughout history is that when people move to other areas, the people who are, quote, native to those areas, which is different from indigenous, by the way, but people who are native to those areas don't like it, right? And it becomes a national security issue. And so that's why, I've parlayed my experiences, not only as a community activist, but as a legislator and as an attorney, into fighting against this climate crisis. It's real, and every single day demonstrates to us that it is real. We had a 10,000-year flood just 7 years ago, and this year we've experienced the worst wildfires in just a scope of 1 month in the state of Colorado. That displaces people, that kills people, right? And that's the social justice movement that I see needs to grow in power and strength. I agree with Stan that, oftentimes we have too many people who are pitted one way or the other, and we need to find a reasonable balance in order to address these issues. But in the society that we're living right now, and in the crises that we have, and the fact that we're running out of time, it's really difficult to find reasonable people. People are fighting for themselves. The second one is the peaceful transition of government. I'm working on a project right now dealing with that issue here in the state of Colorado with some of the top players, political players in the entire state, because we are worried. We're very concerned that what's happening, the rhetoric that we are hearing from this administration, some of the actors both on the left and the far right is causing some social disruption. And we're better than that. We have to come together at this time to ensure the survival of our republic. Do we have a perfect republic? Absolutely not. We're nowhere even close to that. But that was the dream, right? Is that we would become a more perfect union. And I think that this is our time to demonstrate that we're mature enough and that we've evolved enough to make ourselves a more perfect union. This is the moment that we were born for, and we have to rise to that moment. So those are my two issues. We could discuss, over criminalization bills that I brought, at the legislature to address those issues, like getting rid of debtors' prisons, which was an ACLU bill that I carried and that we passed. There's so much that we could talk, but those are the two things right now: climate change and peaceful transition of government that are existential in nature to us.
Thank you. Arash, I'd like to, it's hard to follow all of these really, I think, challenging issues and calls for action, right? But what,
Yeah.
how,
Thanks a lot, Lexi. No, I think to what Joe said in terms of the power of this moment and the crucial moment that we're at, kind of speaks to the difficulty in highlighting one or even, as Denise did, 3 social justice issues. But I'm going to focus on immigrants' rights because it's the easiest for me to talk about, and also because I think it highlights some of the things that the other speakers have focused on. You know, in terms of the power dynamics that Jorge was talking about, we've seen an all-out attack on every possible front on immigrants over the past 4 years. And it didn't start 4 years ago. Certainly the Obama administration and previous administrations also, carried out their injustices against the immigrant community. So this isn't a brand new problem, but we've certainly seen it on a magnitude. And another reason I want to focus on it is because part of the reason what drew me to the ACLU, to Stan's point about being more focused on solutions and resolutions to the problem. I saw an organization that through actions in court and through actions in policy was focused on how to fight back against the Trump administration, whether it was through taking the Muslim ban to court or a variety of other ways. That's what drew me to the ACLU and what has continued to draw me to this work. In terms of the intersectionality of how this works with other issues, this ridiculous wall that our president has been focused on for the past 4 years has certainly impacted the environment, has been called out over and over again, has been built on sacred native land. I know Joe can speak to both those things much more articulately than I can. So that's one example. Another example is some of the inequities that have been called into play, and a lot of folks have talked about incarceration. Well, a couple miles away in Aurora here, we have a private facility. We have an immigrant detention facility for people who are in civil immigration removal proceedings, not, charged with crimes or not convicted of crimes, but are in civil removal proceedings. And they are in cages and are in essentially a prison that is run by the Geo Group for profit. And if you want to read more about that, I would point you to a report that the ACLU put out. Denise, was that about a year ago? Maybe a little longer than a year ago, actually, called Cashing In on Cruelty. So people locked up in cages, denied adequate medical care, kind of the perfect storm for the COVID crisis. This comes up and advocates across the country are calling this out. And, predictably, we see outbreaks left and right. And I just want to point out that some news came out yesterday that there are 37 COVID positive detainees being held in one pod in that facility. And that brings the totals, by my count, since the beginning of the pandemic to 91 detainees and 19 staff. So you want to talk about the disproportionate impacts of a current crisis like the pandemic. There's one of them. Immigrants in our community are unable to access a lot of the same benefits. Part of that is done by deliberate federal policies that have held them out of those benefits. Ineligibility for unemployment, for example. And by the way, Colorado in 2006, I believe it was, passed a number of anti-immigrant laws to lock people out, actually deliberately to keep people from doing business and accessing benefits in Colorado. So we see the effect of those policies, and so immigrants are not able to access benefits. In addition, they have the fear of even getting medical care because of their information being turned over to ICE potentially. So, you want to talk about disproportionate impacts, certainly people of color, people in poverty, but also by virtue of their status and by virtue of taking attack after attack, and in part because they are powerless, because this administration knows many of them will not be able to vote the president and many of the legislators out of office. They continue to use the immigrant community as scapegoats and as punching bags. So I think that's one issue that for me is obviously very personal, being a child of immigrants, and has drawn me to the work that I do today.
So I'm wondering if we can kind of contextualize this moment in the past, right? So I don't always think that law students, and frankly anyone really does the best of sort of remembering what has occurred, how we've grown, what we've learned, that we've been in challenging moments before. And I'm thinking about sort of the world of the 60s, right? When right before things were pretty awful, right? But then there was also this, I think, I don't know if it's conflation, convergence, right? Of organizers, of lawyers, of policy experts, of so many different people, right? Where we were able to make some tangible changes. Obviously, we still have a long way to go. That's very clear, right? But curious of how any of you would compare this current moment to that past moment. And I don't know if everyone has to answer this, but anyone have any thoughts on sort of the, what's the same, what's different? How can we capitalize on the energy? What can we do? What are the comparisons here? Stan, you unmuted, so why don't you go first?
Sure, I'll try to be really quick. And having lived through the 60s and remembering them, I think among other things, the lesson from the 60s is that these issues are a whole lot harder than we thought they were then. And it also shows the limits of laws and changing laws and legal approaches to these problems. And, you know, I've had the chance in the last few years to learn Spanish and to travel pretty extensively in Latin America, which has been part of an outgrowth of a program that we did in the DA's office to protect immigrants from crime. In the process, I've gotten to be really good friends with lawyers and judges in many different countries, but particularly in Chile. Well, Chile, which is a country dealing with a huge amount of unrest, is preparing to rewrite its entire constitution. And one of the issues in their constitutional debates is, what do we do to protect the rights of indigenous people in Chile? And Chile, like all Latin American countries, has a long history of abuse and exploitation of indigenous peoples. And so there's a political faction in Chile that wants to get this right this time. So I'm friends with Jim Anaya, who's the dean of the CU Law School, who's a terrific guy, also fluent in Spanish, and is an expert in the rights of indigenous people. So I've set up some panels with lawyers in Chile and judges with Dean Anaya talking about these issues. And this is a long way of trying to say what I think is important about this. Dean Anaya said in one of these panels, he said, it doesn't matter what your constitution says if your culture and your people don't respect the rights of indigenous peoples. And I do think that's a very strong lesson for all of us, particularly as lawyers, because we're trained to think it's all about how do we change the law? How do we change this? How do we pass this? But what we really have to do is work to change the hearts and minds of people to address issues. You can have 1983 in place. You can have all kinds of constitutional rights in place. You can have all kinds of protections in place, and you're still going to have a George Floyd incident happen unless you've really worked to develop a culture where people respect the rights of everybody who's involved. So my answer is, what I think when I think of the 60s and how important those times were, is these issues are a lot harder than we thought they were in the 60s.
The only thing that I was going to, I think a lot of what Stan mentioned, you're absolutely right. My only except or my parenthetical is if we waited for culture to change, we never would have passed the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act or a lot of the other things that we have done in the 60s. So I don't think it is to anyone's benefit, especially the underserved or those forgotten, to wait for the culture to catch up. So I think it is important to put some sort of laws in place that do protect the minority. That's really kind of the point of the Bill of Rights. And I'll also add that, you know, I don't know what it was about the George Floyd incident itself, because let's face it, there have been so many individuals of color that have been brutalized by police for decades. Right here in Colorado, you don't have to go very far. There was something about that captured on video, the seconds that ticked by, that one police officer didn't care and that nobody around him cared to intervene either, you know, went viral. You had a bunch of people that had been cooped up for a very long time, and they watch this and they're, you know, F you, right? We're going to do something about it. And then you go to the streets. And those are the things that you do want to capitalize on. I do give a lot of credit to our state legislators that did champion Senate Bill 217, which is the Law Enforcement Accountability Act. It was a moment that needed to be seized, and it was. And I think there are times that we can capitalize on those moments if we're, you know, smart enough and astute enough and scrappy enough and vigilant enough to do it.
You know, I really love this question, Alexia. This is probably the one of the most quintessential questions that anybody can ask, is to take a look back at your history. I was on the House floor and we were doing I think we were doing the resolution on the Holocaust. And I went up to the well and I said, history is unoriginal and it's vain. It's unoriginal, and that's why we say history repeats itself. And it's vain because it dares us to actually change it. And I got that. That was my quote. But that thought came to mind because when I was a professor at Metro, I taught this really cool class. It was called Chicanos and the Law, and it was a historical look at the way that the American judicial system treated the Chicano Latino community from February 2nd, 1848, the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, moving forward to present date. And I was able to demonstrate through court cases, this wasn't, you know, my rhetoric or anything like that, because the class was about the law. And I was able to demonstrate how through court cases, through our own court system, and through the laws that were developed, why we are still in a really bad spot as a Chicano Latino community today. So, for example, I taught on 5 things. Number 1 was the taking away of property, right? The Supreme Court after 1848 did a monumental job of making sure that community property was taken away and that there were laws passed to allow white settlers to take property away from Chicanos, Latinos here in the Southwest. That then resulted in issues involving voting rights, because back then, if you weren't a property owner, you couldn't vote. It resulted in problems with education, because if you couldn't vote, then you couldn't actually try to do anything to improve your education system, which resulted in segregation and all sorts of other problems, which then led to the issues of economic disparities. Because if you don't have an education and you can't vote, well, now you're going to have a hard time finding a job. And not only that, but the black codes that were adopted in the South were used against Latinos and Chicanos here in the Southwest, all the way out to California, where you were prohibited from actually holding certain jobs. So literally, you were relegated to menial labor, right? Which then led to the next part of it, the most nefarious part of all, which is the criminalization of our communities, right? And that cycle then perpetuated itself. It's the cycle of poverty over and over and over again for generations upon generations, right? And then everybody blames us, and they blame the immigrants, and they blame our own strife upon us, saying, well, it's your fault. You should pull yourself up from your bootstraps. How am I supposed to pull myself from my bootstraps when you took them away from me back in 1848? And my family has never been able to find any bootstraps since. And how the perpetuation of poverty is actually the white supremacy that we see in our system existing today. And that's how I went into the legislature with that knowledge behind me to try to create changes in law, to address property rights, to address education, to address voting rights, to address economic issues, and to address overcriminalization, right? If you want to really improve upon yourself as an attorney or as a law student, go back and review your history of how the American judicial system has treated certain groups. The funny thing is you'll see that same perpetuation of racism, it's not smart. It's not original, right? It perpetuates itself from the black codes to what happened to Latinos, to the Chinese Exclusionary Act, to what's happening with the Muslim community, what's happening to LGBTQ. I literally was on the House floor when Republicans tried to pass an amendment that was it came right out of Jim Crow. Literally the language came out of Jim Crow. I recognized it. And I ran up to the well and I started just tearing them down for trying to pass a Jim Crow measure against the LGBTQ community. That was because of my training. That was because of my education. And that's because I'm Chicano, that I knew this. No one else went up to the well or even recognized it. That's what's important about the position that you're in, is that you have a history that you can get to know, and that makes you even more powerful as an attorney.
So I think if it's okay, Jorge, did you want to add, or should I move on to another question?
I guess the one thing I just want to drop a name from 60s era civil rights movement. A guy named Derek Bell. He was a lawyer for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and he is a critical race theorist. And if you look at his work and you look at the context of what happened in the 1960s and what successes were able there, and he sort of explores the why they were able to have some success in passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, et cetera, et cetera. I think he was onto something, and you can use that same why. The interest convergence is what he talks about. I think that is a successful way that's lessons from the 60s that we can move forward. But if nothing else, if you heard nothing else, Derek Bell, Google him. The man's a legend, and we can move on.
And just to give context to that, right? So when Jorge uses the term interest convergence, right, which is can be bulky, right, to some of us, what he's talking about is like we have to make like everyone care, basically, right? I'm being very simple here, right? But we have to make white folks, cisgendered folks, right, able-bodied folks, et cetera, and so forth, care about what is occurring, right, to people of color, to people who are non-binary, et cetera. And we have, like, their interests have to converge, right? They have to see a connection, right, to the struggle and to the challenge that those who are minoritized and marginalized feel, right? So that's basically the very simplistic version of that theory. He has written so much good stuff, so I totally echo, read that. And my guess is if you're in any sort of race-based course in college, you might actually get a dose. So, and if not, encourage your professor, like tell your professor, we need to read Derek Bell, right? But that's the idea. And I think it's actually really important. And I think we're seeing it a little bit now, right? When you go to protests now, you don't always see that many Black folks there. You see a whole lot of white folks, right? And that's not a bad thing, right? Because there's also different risks, right? In who goes to these events. But I think that that's really important because I think we're starting to see other folks who are maybe not as affected as much in their daily lived experience, you know, coming up, right, and speaking. And I think that that's really important. So I'm not seeing any questions or comments, so I'm gonna plow ahead, but please don't be shy if you have a question, a comment, or a reflection. We also have some really esteemed folks in the audience who I'm sure have things to add too. So I will transition though to a little bit thinking about what lawyers can do, right? So this is a little different than the question that's on the page that you all may have seen, so I hope that's okay. But essentially, I think it's important to talk about the issues, right, and how heavy they are and how important they are. And I think we've touched on that a bunch, if not all, but you know, certainly a bunch of issues that intersect. But what does a lawyer do, right, about these issues? So I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about different strategies. I don't think each of you, your day-to-day is not the same, right, for all of you. So, you know, what are what can a lawyer, having that JD, how can you make an impact on these issues, right? What are things that you all have done in your careers? And if you could speak maybe with some specificity in an example, I think that might help it come to life for folks. Arash, would you like to go first on this one?
Sure, Lexi. Thank you. So I might take this in a little different direction because there are a variety of things you can do with a law degree. And there are a variety of ways you can kind of find your purpose and kind of like serve the greater good, which is very, I know it sounds cheesy, but it really, I had a passion for civil rights when I went to law school, and I really wanted to do the most good that I could. And I think we all have our place and we all have our role. And it's just a matter of finding one, what interests us, and two, you know, what works for us. So I've gone through this path a bit. I've done a fair amount of litigation. And when we talk about litigation, people typically think about being in court. And very honestly, I don't go to court that much now. I didn't go to court that much when I was at the ACLU, and I didn't go to court that much before that. Sure, I was maybe inside a courtroom, I don't know, once a month. But, you know, litigation is a lot of reading cases. It's a lot of writing things, you know, motions and briefs and memos and things like that. And I enjoy that, and I like doing that. But the part that I really don't like is fighting with people. And litigation is one of the few jobs where instead of working with people, your job is primarily to work against people, and it's to fight people. And definitely that brings a lot of change. And, you know, I don't want to speak for Denise, but at least when I was at the ACLU, you see the full range. The lawyers go to court and they fight a law or a practice that's wrong, and they bring it down and they cause change, and that gets attention and it causes other people to change. Denise also makes the laws, or she helps makes those laws, which Joe also did as a legislator. And so for me, at one point, it just, some people love it. Some people, they go into a deposition for 7 hours, and it's you know, intense, and they're yelling at the other side, and they come out of there and they're got an adrenaline high. That's not necessarily me. I do it when I have to, but you know, that's why I wanted to do a little more of the policy work. I kind of like working with people more. You know, I think you're hearing in terms of what do the issues look like as lawyers, I think you're hearing the variety of it. And I think we've talked about that a little, and we can get into specifics more. But I wanted to focus a little bit more about, you know, different ways to use a JD and how, you know, and just take a more kind of personal approach. So I'll stop there.
Jorge.
So one of the things I thought about a lot was when I transitioned from a nonprofit work that I loved it, to working for the government. And so I guess another way of being a lawyer is actually, I think working for the federal government specifically, right? The government is Leviathan, right? This is this powerful entity, and it wields a tremendous amount of power and authority. And there are safeguards in place to try to make sure that it doesn't go off the rails. And some of them are more successful than others. And there are people who would like to use that power of Leviathan for things that you might be against. But if you are able to steer that ship, it's a slow moving ship. Oh, goodness gracious, that's a slow moving ship. But if you can steer the ship in the direction that you think is right and just, and you have the power of that Leviathan to be able to make the progress that you see. I've only been in the government for 4 years, and I didn't go in intending it was going to be a forever job. I still don't think it's going to be a forever job. But there are people who have spent their whole career here, and you can see the pride that they take in being like that steadiness over administrations, and the joy they get when they were able to steer that ship in the direction that they think made some real progress and some real good things happen. So that's one way that I've been able to experience being a lawyer that people can consider.
Denise, do you want to jump in?
Not really. I mean, I think, you know, Arash kind of articulated in part why I don't practice law, because I don't like the fights and I don't like the never-ending paper war that you do in motions, practice, etc. I have used my law degree in another way. Like I said earlier, I did practice law for a bit, but I do like the policy work, and I think having my law degree helps that. So I certainly wouldn't tell anyone that, hey, you know, maybe I don't want to practice law. Why am I in law school? Because I think, like Arash stated, there are a lot of things that you can do with a law degree. And I think it does help me to grasp public policy issues a little bit better. And I do believe that with, if you can make an impact on the law, it does have the potential of affecting a lot of people in a way that maybe one lawsuit at a time wouldn't be able to do in that same period of time. So, you know, think of public policy as another career post law school.
Dan, yeah, please.
I'll try to be very, very quick. I mean, first of all, I'm a lawyer that loves being in court, and I've been a lawyer almost 40 years, and every job I've had, I've tried to be in court as much as I can because I think the process is fascinating. And for the young students who are thinking about being a lawyer, know that actually being an active litigant can be very rewarding and terrific. But I think the major thing that lawyers bring to these issues is common sense and the ability to explain how things actually work. You know, these are huge issues, huge problems, but lawyers, we're trained to understand the mechanics. And when I was the elected district attorney and very involved in lobbying and would run into people like Joe and Denise all the time, the major role that I saw for DAs in lobbying on public safety issues was to say, well, you can do that, but if you do that, here's what the consequence is going to be on another issue that matters to you. So I really think lawyers have an important obligation, and frankly, all the people on this call and this panel do this, and Denise and Joe and others, you know, to go to the legislature and say, okay, if you want to address an issue, that's a great idea. We'll help you do that, but we will also help you understand how to do it in a way that actually works, which comes back to my point that there are limitations to the law, and we have to be realistic about having our legislators and others adopt laws that will actually solve the problems that they're trying to do. And lawyers are the ones who can come in and say, let's tinker with this, let's change that remedy, let's amend this to help it be more effective.
Joe, did you want to add anything?
One thing, with the JD, whatever you do with it, just be inspirational, right? Inspire others to want to have a JD. Denise, Arash, I know them. They're extremely inspirational. See Denise run through legislation, just absolutely inspirational. See the cases that Arash takes on, inspirational. And when Stan was the Boulder County DA, he was an inspirational DA. I'm not going to call him inspirational now because he'll use that against me in a court of law on cases that I have against him. but truly, he was an inspirational DA. So be that. Be inspirational.
So there is a question from an audience member, so I'd love to just make sure we get that heard. Matthew asks about the idea of addiction and drug use for minorities and people of color. So he says, laws and procedures that hurt minorities, but we no longer sort of talk about addiction. There was an uproar in deaths when they were in certain populations, right, middle-class communities, but now it seems to be buried again. So what about this moment? Is there a moment to change these sorts of laws? Curious on folks' thoughts. I don't know if Stan, you might, I don't know if you have thoughts on this one first. They don't have to call on you, but I know you've done some work.
Sure, no, well, I should jump in as the ex-DA. I mean, the problem is the drug war is ridiculous. And you cannot take a criminal justice system that has been designed to deal with bad behavior and adopt it to the issue of possession and use of substances. It hasn't worked, it won't work. And so one of the things we have to do is to decriminalize, I think, substance prosecutions on almost every level so that issues like addiction can be dealt with as the public health and mental health issues that they are, rather than criminal justice issues.
Has anyone else worked on these issues and want to offer any perspective?
I'll just offer a small one. I mean, I really think this raises, a question and an issue that many people have been working on for a really, really long time about, why do we put individuals experiencing homelessness in jails? Why do we put individuals suffering through an addiction in jails? Nobody gets well in a cell. And so they really ought to be part of another system. And I think in some ways, this really segues in so many ways with the defund police movement that's taking root, is because there are just certain things that should not be left to individuals with a gun, that they really are better dealt with by professionals and individuals who know how to deal with people in crisis, whether it's a drug crisis or a mental health crisis. There are professionals to deal with that, and it's not law enforcement necessarily.
So seeing no other audience questions, maybe we'll talk about an issue or two that we haven't gotten into as much detail. I mean, we haven't really touched on COVID too much, right? Indirectly, but I think, you know, some of us may have had impacts of COVID in our own small communities. I'm sure others have as well, some of our members and our team members on the call. And I'm just wondering if anyone can talk a little bit about how the pandemic is affecting your work and how you're addressing the challenges that your sort of clients and communities you serve face, how it's changed your work. Any thoughts on this? Joe, do you want to go first?
Sure, thank you. I appreciate that. It has affected our work, and I don't want to say negatively or positively, but my team and I, you know, just like this, we're having to meet virtually all the time and deal with you know, the climate crisis in that manner. But here's the big aspect of COVID. If you take a look at the World Health Organization and you take a look at NASA's website, just Google WHO or NASA and pandemic, and you'll see that what they have said, and they've said it for a while, is that the worse our climate gets, the more pandemics we're going to see. Because we're encroaching in areas where these pandemics are pretty much isolated. And as we continue to encroach, as our climate change continues to happen, they're going to be released. This is just going to be one of many other pandemics that we're going to face. And so that's one thing that my group has been dealing with in approaching this climate crisis situation. And it's kind of big, right? I mean, when you take a look at it, we're just a small little nonprofit here in Colorado having to deal with you know, a larger a worldwide issue. But thank God that there are other organizations out there too who we work alongside. So that's one of the big things.
COVID has created lots of problems. Some of them are manifestations of deep-seated systemic problems that have already existed. And it's really just putting it out, airing out that dirty laundry. And some of them are like logistical, like how do you conduct meetings and hearings and investigate things in an age of COVID? But one of the things that COVID has done that I think is really positive, and I hope has a very lasting impact, is it has the use of this. You know, I'm in DC. I'm in Maryland. I'm in DC, right? I'm the non-Coloradian. That's why I think Joseph doesn't like talk about how great my work is, because he doesn't know me yet. And which is fine. That's good. But like I get to be here with you, right? And because of COVID, right? This system has become something that is functional, and we're getting better at it every day. And what that means is that in lawyering, especially civil rights lawyering, right? You might be able to access communities or people or stories that you might not have even thought of doing otherwise. Or you might be able to present something and offer information. People are starving for information that empowers them. And you might be able to do that to reach more people because you're not feeling stuck to having like an in-person town hall. And I think after this pandemic slides, I really hope that there's going to be continued access via the internet and hybrid in-person and virtual meetings that where you're going to be able to get more facts. You're going to be able to hold people accountable from a distance, and you're going to be able to connect with future brilliant lawyers from across the country. So I do want to say that there's some positive things that I hope come out of this era.
I can talk to some specific, you know, kind of legal things with my work and how, you know, when the pandemic started, we felt the need to be very much informing the immigrant community of, you know, are you eligible for unemployment? You know, what benefits can you get? What are your legitimate fears and what are your illegitimate fears? And, you know, there's, legislative effort that we've been working on some time for the state not to be sharing information with ICE and to leave its databases open to vulnerability from ICE access. And it's something that Denise has worked on with us as well, along with some other groups. But it became more of an issue during COVID because the governor and state officials recognized that people weren't getting tested, they weren't accessing healthcare, they weren't accessing other services because of their fears. And so the governor's office, when the legislative session shut down and we couldn't pass those laws, the governor's office issued some internal guidance, and we still need to strengthen that. And so we're going to continue to work on legislation. So those are a couple ways. The other thing is we needed to get people out of detention. And one of the things was just ranting against ICE. Like, why are you still going hands-on with arrests and finding people? There were reports that they were showing up to Denver public schools when they were setting up free meals for people, that there were reports that ICE was showing up there to make arrests. And it's like, how can you be doing this during a pandemic? And in fact, what we saw, and I'm not taking credit for this, but we actually saw a huge downtick in ICE enforcement. And the detention center that I was speaking about earlier is actually at numbers lower than we've seen in a long, long time, which makes it even ridiculous that they're packing to get people together, even more ridiculous that they're still spreading COVID. And, you know, they're continuing to transfer people from facility to facility, which is causing this. And the last thing I'll say is that one of the things we were doing was focused on various legal efforts to get people out of detention. Whether that was in bond hearings, we filed what's called a habeas corpus case to try to get people out. The ACLU, I don't know if Denise will want to talk about this more, filed this incredible lawsuit with a number of law firms to get people out of jail. So it was two lawsuits actually, one out of jail, and then against the Department of Corrections of the state to get people out of prisons there because of COVID. We don't have those same remedies against the federal government, so we had to find other ways to do it. And fortunately, again, numbers went down on their own, and we had some successes, and then we had some losses in court saying this is not the right way to try to get someone out due to this disease. So I could keep going, but I'll pause so that other people can chime in.
Yeah, I can add a little bit of, it was kind of something that I mentioned in my opening introductory comments is, you know, our office went on hiatus on March 13th, and it was probably on March 14th. It was on a Saturday morning right after that I was on a call with a bunch of criminal justice reform advocates wondering what we were going to do about our jails and prisons, simply because of the inability to follow CDC guidelines. And frankly, it's kind of jails and prisons are a virus's delight. And so we proceeded to work on that, you know, pretty nonstop. What's really amazing is that beginning in March we have been tracking the jail population every week since March. And what we have seen is a 47% decrease in our jail population statewide. That is in the population numbers of the 1990s. We haven't seen low jail populations like this since then. And what's interesting is that county sheriffs are doing the things that we had been wanting them to do for a very long time. Don't arrest people, give them a summons. Don't arrest people at all or give them a citation because the crime is so low, you let them go. You give people automatic bonds that are personal recognizance, so they're not held on money. So many things like that have happened throughout the system. And now we're at this 47% reduction, and the sky didn't fall. We will be, you know, news alert. We're going to be putting out a report next week that's going to show all of that. And it's also going to show that there was no uptick in crime. That if, to the extent that there was uptick in crime in certain cities, for example, in Denver, violent crime, it isn't at all related to what we have done to depopulate our jails, which makes you wonder, and it should make you wonder, why were those people in jail to begin with? And it goes back again to our addiction to jails and prisons And we got to get out of it. Now we are trying, as Arash said, we have filed a lawsuit against the Department of Corrections and the governor for their failure to do the same for our state prisons. And there simply is no desire to release anybody from our prisons. The governor has fallen back on this mantra of, I'm not going to release dangerous individuals. Well, Governor, no one's asked you to do that. And so we're going to persist and keep on doing that. We're also working on trying to depopulate our juvenile facilities. So we got a lot of people locked up that don't need to be, and especially now, we should pay even more special attention to those inequities.
Stan, did you want to add anything? I see you unmuted. So.
Oh yeah, I know. I can't help myself. I totally agree with what Denise just said. And you know, when I was DA and head of CDAC, and also in the National DA's Board, I kept saying, let's focus on who is it that really needs to be incarcerated. And in Boulder County, we used to have, every year we had about 2,500 felonies. And I would always tell my staff, of these 2,500, maybe 300 of them need to have significant prison sentences because of violence, because of, I was a big one for a lot of white collar crime. I think prison is necessary for various reasons, but most crimes, probation, work release, a million other things are fine, and you can deal with that. COVID, it has overall been a nightmare, but it has had two benefits. One, it's forced old guys like me to figure out how to use Zoom, which has been good, particularly since I'm in bed all the time. And so I can still keep my practice active and be in meetings like this. And number two, as Denise indicated, it has forced law enforcement to do what I was trying to do just by being a nag to them, to look at the question of who really needs to be in custody. We have so over-criminalized all kinds of things that didn't used to be criminal and creating criminal penalties. COVID has forced sheriffs and DAs and police chiefs and judges to say who really needs to be in custody. And I think that's been a very good development. And I think Denise and others who have forced that issue through lawsuits have done a great job. But I just know from talking to policymakers, people are suddenly saying, yeah, why did we have all these people in custody?
Thanks, Nan. So we have a couple questions as it relates to voting and elections. So I think we'll transition for these for probably our last few minutes. So one question is about, for the folks who work in voting rights who have thoughts on the subject, how much do you see the fight right now as regaining ground and how much is breaking new ground? The person also says, Rami, I think if I'm saying that name correctly, so I apologize if I do not, but please correct me. The person also says, after the cutbacks to the VRA, do you see it as a way to push for a new robust act? Are the courts a good vehicle, or is this more a policy push? So where are we at basically in voting rights, I think is the question. Are we playing catch up? Are we breaking new ground? What do we do with the VRA, et cetera? If anyone has specific thoughts. Denise, I'm inclined to maybe go to you first, but yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just hit things really kind of quickly. So, you know, the federal courts, the US Supreme Court, gutted some important provisions of the Voting Rights Act. And so I don't really see going through the federal courts as an avenue to fix these problems, simply because the federal courts are not friendly to this issue. I will say that it depends on what happens in November, whether you go for something more robust as far as policy. So there certainly are ways to fix the VRA. There are ways to make it more robust than it was before certain elements of it were struck down, primarily with Justice Roberts being the swing on that. But I will say that the one thing that I do want to add is Colorado really is a beacon. We are really, really lucky here. In 2013, Joe or Representative Salazar, you were there and you passed this very, very robust piece of legislation that says everybody that's registered to vote, you're going to get your ballot in the mail, and that's how you're going to vote. And we have systems in place that make sure that it is really safe and that every vote cast that is legitimate gets counted. And that's a really amazing thing. So all of this hoopla that is being made on the federal level about how you cannot have safe all-mail voting is bogus. It's a bunch of BS. You can. We've been doing it now for 6 years, and it works well. So we are a beacon for the rest of the nation when it comes to voting rights.
Anyone else work on this? Joe, do you have a thought on it?
You know, I think Denise, she captured it quite well. I will say, and this is something that we don't do quite often, and we should. Those voting rights that we expanded in the state of Colorado in 2013, those were Latino-led bills. It was Senator Angela Giron who led that bill on the Senate side, and it was Representative Dan Pabon on the House side, right? And
right, good point.
They were extremely deliberate on ensuring that Colorado would serve as, like Denise said, the beacon throughout the United States in terms of our voting rights. And as a matter of fact, we are seen as the beacon. So the vision that they had was astounding. And I just really appreciate having been there. I was the vice chair of state affairs where the bill came through. And oh my God, the testimony, remember Denise, how bad the testimony was against that bill? Oh, the sky was gonna fall. And I think someone said that there were gonna be buses full of immigrants, illegal immigrants. No, they didn't use that kind of language. They used other language, but there's bus loads were going to be coming in to the polls. It was just all garbage. And we didn't fall for it. And now look at us. We are a beacon.
So the other related voting question is around ballot initiatives. Alex, my former student, hello Alex, asks which ballot measures in this year's election do we think have the potential to help or hurt racial justice? He references a potential repeal of Gallagher and school funding, but wondering if other folks have thoughts on what's in Colorado, I think specifically is what he's likely talking about. I'm thinking.
I am not clear on the Gallagher piece, so I'm not going to answer that one. And it's actually not in the ACLU wheelhouse, but I do want to make folks.
I can't hear Denise. Is that just me?
I think she froze. Denise.
Okay. So we will hopefully get her back in just a minute. I think she's certainly an expert in answering this question, but wondering if other panelists have thoughts as well while we wait for Denise to regroup. Stan, please.
Yeah, Alex, I was on the Boulder Valley School Board for 8 years. Gallagher is an abomination. We absolutely need to repeal it. It will definitely help with school funding and with all kinds of equity issues. But what we really need to do is repeal Tabor, and that's not on the ballot this year.
Dan, just assuming that not everyone is aware, I'm just wondering if you could just give a very brief summary of Tabor and Gallagher. I just think these might be topics that not everyone knows.
Sure. Tabor is an effort, is a requirement, essentially, that any tax increase has to go to a vote of the people, which makes it very, very difficult for county commissioners, school boards, city councils, others to govern and to make sure they have appropriate funding. And it's impacted infrastructure, education, higher education. It's been very devastating. Gallagher is a more technical constitutional amendment, which actually had bipartisan support when it came forward in the early 80s, including by some good friends of mine in Boulder County, that was intended to move the burden of property tax from residential to business properties. It has done that, but it's also basically reduced the ability of many local jurisdictions to raise reasonable revenue through property tax, and it's really had an impact.
If you don't mind, as a legislator, we had to deal with Gallagher, Amendment 23, and Tabor all weaving in and out of each other. And I'll just tell you, it's a hot mess. Tabor is the one that we need to, as Stan said, that's the one that we need to get rid of. I'm a little concerned about what happens with Gallagher, because while it seems that it wouldn't have a disparate impact on low-income property home or homeowners and what have you, we're not so certain what it's going to do. Particularly those the elderly who enjoy the Homestead Act exemptions. What's going to happen with that? I can't tell you yes or no on Gallagher as a legislator. I was an absolute yes to get rid of Gallagher. That was pre-COVID. And now with COVID and with falling state budgets, you know, can we honestly say that a yes vote is a good vote? I don't know.
I think we do have Denise back. Denise, I don't know if you want to, in a minute or so, just give your thoughts, because we'll have a closing comment.
No, not on Gallagher. I'm with Joe. I have no idea yet what I'm going to do.
Okay. Okay. Well, we didn't really hear you well on the election, the ballot stuff. Was there anything you wanted to say? Because
I know when I apologize that my internet went out. I just wanted folks to pay attention to Amendment 76, which is intended to talk about only citizens being able to vote, regardless of the fact that that's already in our Constitution. And I really view that as being intended to stigmatize immigrants. And the ACLU has taken a firm no position on that for those reasons.
Alexi, what I'll do is the Working Families Party has a racial justice guide on the ballots for 2020. We are finalizing that. It's the community of, it's the People of Color Collaborative that we are a part of. We have put this ballot guide together, and I can float it over your way once it's done, and then you can share it.
That would be great. I'll make sure to get it to folks who have access to everyone on the listserv. Thank you. So I think I'll just combine, we have about 5 minutes or 3 minutes left. So we'll combine a question from the panelists and a question that sort of we have. So one is, all of this work is just really hard, right? And it's exhausting, especially if you identify also with communities that are impacted, but even if you don't, it's just very, very difficult. So I think there's just a question about emotional exhaustion, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, right? All of the above. How do you power through? And then relatedly, maybe we'll just tag along last piece advice, right, to people interested in legal careers, legal education, et cetera, and social justice. So we'll just go one by one. Maybe, if we could just keep the responses to one minute. So Jorge, we'll go to you first.
All right. What I tell anyone who will listen is that I highly recommend that you just live an intentional life. In all aspects, but in your legal career, that would entail literally putting in your calendar a time to think about, what am I doing? What were my goals to getting here? How have my goals changed, and where do I want to go? And if you do that intentionally, what you will find is you will say, if you are being exhausted emotionally or just unfulfilled, you can then use that as an opportunity to think, well, what are the things I need to put in my life to help support me? Or decide this is not sustainable. I need to veer somewhere else. And if you put these points in your career, in your academic career and your legal career, hopefully that'll help sustain you and put you on whatever path you need to be on to have a long and happy career.
Arash.
Yeah, I'm hoping you call me, because I just want to piggyback on that terrific answer. When people come to me and say they're interested in going to law school, I say, have an idea of knowing what you want to do with that law degree. Because, and that can change. It changes for a lot of us. Certainly changed for me. I wanted to be in court all the time. Turns out maybe I don't. But the folks who go to law school for the sake of going to law school are the ones who end up in a job they don't like. And being a lawyer is very, very difficult. I just want to say that. It's a challenging job. I think there are a number of reasons. I won't get into it, but the analytical frame of thinking can be tough on your psyche. It's can be hard hours. If you're litigating, fighting against people can be hard emotionally. And then someone at Magali posed the question about compassion fatigue, which in our line of work and kind of the stuff we do is very important too. And I don't have a very good question for that, other than you just learn to separate it. And sometimes it actually feels really bad. Like when you go home and you see things on the news or you hear about things or things in my personal life, for example, that don't affect me the way I think they would. So I think, a lot of it, again, it'll sound cheesy, but a lot of it comes down to self-care at the end of the day. You just have to. I'm in therapy, not right now, but I have been. A lot of my friends are in therapy. I'm a true believer in it. And you got to know yourself at the end of the day. And I think that's therapy's part of it. But I think you have to know yourself. You have to know your limits. You know, a lot of us want to do kind of everything all the time. And if we don't set those limits and recognize ourselves and what we are good at and what makes us happy, then we're no good to ourselves, we're no good to our families, and we're no good to the greater movement. So that's what I'll leave you with.
Dan.
When I first started practicing law in 1982, my first boss was the wonderful district attorney of Denver named Dale Tooley. Dale Tooley used to say, you know, Stan, you got to remember, you got to take care of yourself, because if you show up on Monday morning in front of a jury and you're exhausted and you haven't slept and you had a fight with your wife and you walk in that courtroom, the jury is going to know that right off the bat. So get your sleep, work out, eat right, and be nice to your wife. Now that's very 1982, I would note, but he was right. I mean, these are jobs, when we're on, we are really on. So when you have time to relax, take care of it and develop hobbies and take care of your friends and take care of the people that are close to you in your life. The next thing I will say is being, Arash is absolutely right. Being a lawyer is very hard, but it's also extremely rewarding. And one of the reasons it's rewarding is with the legal education, unlike almost everybody else in the world, we understand how things work. We understand how decisions get made. We understand how city councils work and legislators and everybody else. And that's a huge benefit, and it can help you.
Freeze.
I think this is another frozen. This isn't me, right? Also frozen for others. Okay, so unfortunate for the sake, with the reality, right? For the sake of time, we will move forward. Joe, for a couple of thoughts, and then Denise.
Sure, I think this question comes from Magali Rocha. And, you know, what I have to say, hermanita, is this. It's three things. It's our ancestors, it's those who are living, and it's our future generations. Yo soy Chicano, en na calle en di, I am Chicano, right? And my ancestors, over the course of hundreds of years, have faced some serious obstacles, right? And they faced these serious obstacles for hundreds of years, so that way I could be the first in my family to go to college and to go to law school, right? I'm standing on their shoulders for this. And that gives me some emotional strength. That gives me a lot of strength from my ancestors. The other thing is those who are living, my children and others who inspire me, such as Federal Judge Christina Arguello, who is on this call, right? Her life, her inspirational life, if you don't know that story behind her life, she gives me that emotional charge. And then the next part of it is our future generations. I believe in the 7 generations. I believe that what I am doing right now will affect the generations 7 times after me. And that gives me my emotional charge. And so, yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot with self-care, but when you draw upon that energy, that very mighty, powerful energy, you realize that the emotional exhaustion is kind of small compared to what they went through. And so that's what I would say. That's how I power myself pretty much throughout the day. So thank you for that question.
Denise, closing thoughts.
Sure. I mean, everybody's captured pretty much everything, but the one thing that I want folks to really hang on to, and that's really hope. Because it really is only with hope that we can continue to do this work. And when we continue to do this work, we do make a more perfect union. And that's really what it's all about. And I also want to know that and really convey that we do this work together and we do it in solidarity. And we will continue it, and we will do it in solidarity with the many that need a voice at this time. Individuals that are incarcerated, individuals experiencing homelessness, our Black, Brown, and Indigenous brothers and sisters who really do need a voice at this time, and other individuals that are otherwise forgotten. And the reason why we do it together, because you know what? I really believe in the saying that if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, we'll go together and we'll make it work.
Thank you so much for that, all of you, for your closing thoughts. And you know, that togetherness, that starts in law school, right? I'm sure many of the students that are on this panel now can talk about the community that they've built with each other. with their mentors, with their professors, and certainly very much with the community of law students. So I think I'm ready to close. Erica, I don't know if you have any official logistical closing thoughts, but I want to thank all of the panelists for their time and all of you for joining. It's hard to get on a Zoom at the end of the workday, so we appreciate everyone taking the time to listen, absorb, and participate.
Yeah, I echo that. Thank you all. I mean, as you guys know, these people are phenomenal. They are busy. We really appreciate your time. I'd be remiss if I didn't let Judge Arguello, I don't know if you wanted to add anything. I'll unmute you. If I can, maybe I can't.
I've unmuted myself.
Ah, perfect.
Thank you. I just want to thank you all. This was so inspiring, and our fellows really had wanted, I mean, COVID has been very difficult for everybody, but I think it's really difficult for the young students that we have, and they're being so isolated and they're missing out on the real experience of college because of COVID. And so this panel was actually put together as a result of their comments that they wanted to have more knowledge and more inspiration about what they could do to help move the country forward in a positive fashion. And I know you all are all busy, and I really appreciate the fact that you took the time to be here with us today. And, you know, I agree with Jorge and the other speakers that, you know, COVID has been great in the sense that it allows us to put these together and to share all of our ideas and our thoughts and have these interactions. And this was just truly inspiring. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Thank you, Judge,
thanks
for all you-
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.